Hey, welcome to Film Fanatics, 3 film geeks discussing movies new and old. My name is Dan.
My name is Justin.
And I'm Joe.
This week we review some box office challenged films that have come out in recent weeks, like The Boy Next Door, Project Almanac, and Mordecai, also a film overlooked by Oscar, A Most Violent Year, and 2 films recently released on DVD, The Grand Seduction, starring show favorite Brendan Gleeson, and Frontera, starring another great Michael Pena. Our triple feature of Oscar films is new classic Captain Phillips, my pick for old classic Precious, and Oscar winner Around the World in 80 Days. Now, this marks the first time ever that all 3 of our older films on the show were Best Picture nominees. So, in our top 5 this week, we will look at the Best Picture nominees from 1990 on and reveal our favorite nominees that did not win the coveted top trophy. Let's get right into it, though, with The Boy Next Door. This is an erotic thriller in which Jennifer Lopez plays the sexiest high school English teacher ever, named Claire. She is in the midst of separating from her husband, played by John Corbett, when her neighbor's hot young grandson Noah moves in, he's played by Ryan Guzman, and starts to help Claire around the house while befriending her nerdy son Kevin, played by Ian Nelson, and also seducing Claire before he wants their one-night stand to be much, much more. Kristen Chenoweth co-stars as vice principal of the school and Claire's friend. The Boy Next Door almost qualifies as a guilty pleasure movie. I say almost because I can't say it was really a full-on pleasure to watch it, but sat next to most of the other January releases this year, I did enjoy it more than most of those. Lopez is the best reason to see this movie, and it was a strong casting choice, to say nothing, though, of Guzman's body, which is on display quite a bit here. And he's a good enough actor for what the role calls for, but most of the other actors struggle, especially her son, Ian Nelson, and Chenoweth is woefully out of place. It's also pretty by the numbers for a stalker story. Director Rob Cohen seems to be unsure if he should go all the way with the corny jokes and double entendres, or make a more straight-ahead thriller, never quite finding that balance. He does get the squeamish factor right, though, especially in the final showdown. I'm sure you guys noticed that I would have a problem with the serious eye injury that befalls one of the characters. The movie is not good, and it could have been more fun, but I didn't hate it. It's a C- for me. Joe, let's go to you next for The Boy Next Door.
Well, when this movie first started, it just opened up with the dialogue, and I thought, oh wow, this is really bad. But it does kind of move on and pick up quickly from that. I think it kind of stays within the steaminess, I guess. Like, it's pretty by the numbers for what you'd expect for the naughtiness, and I think it's giving the audience mostly what they want in that sense. The problem is that the darker it gets, I feel like it kind of loses its identity. I mean, there were some legitimately, I guess, frightening scenes, but it's so predictable that you kind of lose it really quickly. And you're right, the director's obviously not sure what direction to take this, but Jennifer Lopez does do a pretty good job in the movie despite it. And I did think the young lead, what's his name?
Ryan Guzman? Guzman, yeah.
He was all right. I mean, it's cheesy, it's stupid, but I don't know. I've seen much worse movies. I'd probably leave it with the C- as well.
Okay. Justin, how about for you?
Well, after the awful promotions, I figured this was going to be bad. But wow, this completely went above and beyond all the horrible expectations I was already anticipating. And honestly, it wouldn't be so bad if it didn't take itself so seriously. It's laughable. The delivery of some of the lines is borderline riff-worthy. And the script is just appalling. It is a dreadful, nightmarishly bad movie that makes me question how Rob Cohen finds work. I have no problem calling The Boy Next Door the worst of 2015 thus far. I give it an F.
This is your 3rd F already,
On a roll,
right?
man.
That's correct.
Well,
No, this is definitely not as bad as those other
I'm
Fs
sorry,
you
the
gave.
script for this movie is a joke.
the script is bad, but I think that's kind of the point. I don't think anybody's trying to fool
No,
anything.
it takes itself seriously, which is why...
Yeah, but the delivery, though. I mean,
the delivery is atrocious.
I think it struggles with taking itself seriously.
finding that balance, maybe. But
I mean, we see the lines in the trailers, oh, I love your mom's cookies, I mean, there's a couple of jokes
fixing
in
the
there.
garage door.
Fixing the garage door.
It's more jokes in terms of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're trying to be funny.
I think it was more tongue-in-cheek than laugh out loud,
Hilarious.
Knee slappers. But, no, I don't think it's anywhere near as bad. The other 2 Fs Justin gave this year were Taken 3 And Joe, you didn't see this, but The Woman in Black too. Both of those, I would never watch again. This I could watch again. I mean, I wouldn't sit there and I'm not going to buy the DVD, but I mean, I thought it was fun for what it was.
What was it, Dan?
I admit, Justin, I thought it would be a little more fun based on the previews showing those kind of double entendre lines and stuff. It wasn't quite that fun, but I don't know. There wasn't. It was kind of bland by the numbers, like we said, and it has a bit of an identity crisis.
It's just sleaze.
But it's just. I mean,
it's cheesy.
It's sleaze. I'll give you that one, Joe. But it's not even appealing sleaze. It's just blah.
I don't know. I think people that I was watching it found it somewhat appealing. I heard people laughing. I heard people getting.
Yeah, I think Joe's right. I think the audience for this movie
knew what they were getting into.
Wants to see Jennifer Lopez and some hot young thing having sex.
Yeah, really.
They get that.
And it's funny because even some of the things that you're obviously supposed to laugh at, people were laughing at. Like there were definitely some scenes where it knows it's not supposed to take itself seriously. Sometimes it does.
Is.
Sometimes.
But it is.
Sometimes.
I think as it goes further along, it takes itself more seriously.
But the first 45 minutes of the movie, it knows it's silly. It knows it's cheesy. And that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. It kind of
I'm not so sure, Joe, to be honest with you.
And some of the scenes...
Some of the scenes, yes, but it also, like I said before, it falls so much more into they're trying so hard to be funny that it's unintentionally amusing more than actually, laugh out loud.
I mean, Jennifer Lopez, you didn't think she did an alright job?
Not particularly. I mean, the movie that everyone talks about her doing a great job in, Out of Sight, I've never seen, but the woman has never amazed me. In my defense,
well,
Anaconda.
But she's not. I mean, look at Anaconda. Come on.
What to expect when you're expecting Parker?
Another awful movie. Parker was okay. I didn't mind Parker.
Parker, I thought was going to be worse.
I always liked her in The Cell. I mean, she
never saw The Cell, so I can't speak to that one either.
I mean, in terms of romantic comedies, Made in Manhattan, she's good in.
But
I mean, she's not like the best actress ever, but I think she can do okay.
Yeah, I think in a corny piece like this,
she's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we're not giving her Still Alice over here.
No.
Well, no, no one's arguing that, Dan.
But I mean, I don't know. I thought for what these roles called for, I thought the two leads did fine.
Yeah,
the sex scene was steamy.
That's what they wanted.
They
got it.
I do think the Christian Chenoweth vice principal character was a swing and a miss.
Well, her character didn't make any sense.
No,
the whole movie doesn't
really
make any sense.
No, but like I said,
I don't know. Doesn't it make sense?
What doesn't make the basic
what
premise
doesn't
make
sense about the movie?
Basic premise.
First edition scene. Enough said.
That he had a first edition book. Well,
I found it in a garage sale. Yeah, I'm sure you did.
All right, obviously he was lying to her about that, but we don't know. He's a paralyzed grandfather could be rich or something. I don't know.
Technically, Dan, it is his great uncle
or great uncle rather.
Indeed.
Yep. See, even there we're fighting inconsistencies.
It doesn't matter. The point is,
really doesn't.
It doesn't matter, and that's what I'm saying. People will come see this movie. They'll forget it. If they had a good time, great. Otherwise, I'll just leave it go.
Yeah. All right. Well, up next, Joe, we are going to go to you with A Most Violent Year.
Well, A Most Violent Year is a crime drama from 2014, just last year, written and directed by J.C. Chandor. The film stars Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain, with Alessandro Nivola, David Oyelowo, and Albert Brooks. Set in 1981 New York City, considered to be one of the most violent years in the city's history. Though I looked it up, it's not. It was actually a little before that. It kind of was a steady uphill battle in the 80s after that point. But Abel Morales, played by Oscar Isaac, is a hardworking owner of Standard Oil, an up-and-coming heating oil company. We see that Abel's business has been plagued by hijackings of several of his trucks, each carrying thousands of dollars worth of heating oil. One young driver named Julian, played by Elis Gable, is severely beaten when his oil truck is hijacked by two unknown assailants. Abel's wife, Anna Morales, played by Chastain, beseeches Abel to fight violence with violence, but Abel refuses. Consequently, at the same time as these menacing hijackings taking place, Morales and his company are under investigation by the Assistant District Attorney, Lawrence, played by David Oyelowo, from the recent Selma, who seems determined to expose price-fixing, tax evasion, and various other illegal activities committed by Morales and his competitors within the heating oil business. Meanwhile, Morales has to raise over $1 million to purchase a piece of property to save his dream. There's definitely a lot going on in this movie, and I feel like Chandor definitely is taking a cue from a lot of the classic gangster movies, Goodfellas, Casino, and of course Godfather. I mean, you can see it. There's some brilliant lighting in this movie, just this crisp realism that I really like to follow these characters around. Narratively speaking, I think it flows pretty well, but what really holds it together is the fact that Isaac and Chastain have great chemistry, and both are definitely powerhouses here, giving something to these characters and really defining them for us, but at the same time leaving a sense of mystery. So there is kind of that element which kind of works both for and against the film. And I feel that this movie is kind of really honing in on that gangster movie asset, but it's not really a gangster movie necessarily. It's more about how normal people react to violence and crime and border on the line with organized crime. So it's a really interesting idea. I'm not entirely sure if it's as entertaining as it is interesting, but it's still a very well-made movie, and I do wish that we'd gotten a little bit more about these characters, but for what it is, I feel like it does sell a lot of emotional impact, and I'm going to leave it with an A-.
Okay. Justin, how about for you?
Well, I gotta say, director J.C. Chandor just continues to show how far he's come as a director and how bright his future honestly is. Really liked his work in Margin Call. All Is Lost I gave an A to. This isn't quite as good as All Is Lost, but it's a really, really well-told story. Chastain I originally put on for snub for supporting actress. I will happily substitute for this. She gives a great performance and ties into the story really well. Even when she's not necessarily on screen, you're curious to see where her character is going and how she fits in the overall scheme. Isaac continues to do a great job. And I mean, you said it best, Joe. The lighting, the cinematography, this is a beautiful movie to look at. I gotta admit there are some slow spots, and I'm not entirely sure if it's always the most consistent with the story it's trying to tell, but it is a very well put together movie. I give it an A- as well.
And to clarify, you put Jessica Chastain on your top 5 Oscar snubs for Interstellar.
That's correct.
Just a couple weeks ago when we did that. Well, for me, I think this has an interesting enough plot, but I thought it did move a bit slowly at times. The acting is good, but none of the participants are giving their best performance here. I do agree that the chemistry between Oscar Isaac and Jessica Chastain is great. I mean, I really love Chastain. This is, to me, one of her weaker performances. But the biggest problem with this film I had was the establishment of storyline basics, like relationships. Who are any of these people to Oscar Isaac's character? It takes us a while to even figure it out. Sometimes we still don't know. And also the time period. Other than some boxes Chastain is going through with the company's annual paperwork marked with various years from the late 70s, there's no indicator as to when we are. I was able to piece it together because the New York license plates only had 6 characters. They have 7 now and have for the last 20, 25 years. So I was like, okay, it's got to be 70s or 80s. You know, then I saw her opening the boxes. That was a bit of a problem. I mean, you look at other movies that we've seen recently set in the 70s, you know they're in the 70s without them really throwing it in your face either. The movie's good, but I can see why it got no love from the Academy. It's a B for me. It isn't a gangster movie at all. Like it was positioned as such, but you said it, Joe.
It's definitely
No, but it's structured like one, which I thought was really interesting.
I think it's
that's fine.
I mean, it's obvious, and that's fine. And he's trying to show a different side, I guess.
Right,
like, basically, white collar crime almost.
Right,
and like that fine line.
Yeah,
like I said,
more of a margin call type of crime.
Yes,
than you know.
But I mean, there's some aspects to it that work. I mean, that's what's cool. But like I said, that's one of the problems with the movie. Is like I said, interesting, not necessarily the most entertaining.
Right.
And that's one of the problems too. That's why I couldn't give it a higher grade. It's not entirely sure what story it's trying to tell. There's some great ideas in there for sure, but what exactly are you trying to say? Because I remember I came out of the movie, okay, I feel something, but I'm not entirely sure if the message is clear. So I think that is an issue, and I think that does have to do with narrative relationship structures. Though I was pretty clear about who people were. You know, Albert Brooks is the lawyer. You know, you've got Oleo as the district attorney. I mean,
well, obviously
they say it's
the law side of things.
You know,
but all of these people that he comes in contact with, you know, he goes to the guy on the tennis court in the one scene. I didn't know who he was until he came back to him later on, much later on in the story. I forgot he even existed.
Apparently he's a mafioso.
I guess.
Yeah.
More or less.
But that was not very well established,
I will
is
admit,
my point.
that did surprise me. I thought he was like a competitor, but then I found out, oh no, you don't want to take a loan out from me.
That's who you are.
You're a mobster? No, like, I thought it was interesting, but it's like he got blended in because he's no longer part of that necessarily.
Right.
So, I mean, it's like I said, it's interesting. A lot of cool ideas, but I do understand it's got some issues with the message. What do you think, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one of those, like, I can't really fault anyone for not thinking this is a great movie. I mean, I'll give you the fact that the time period did kind of confuse me, but given the clothing style, I don't think it's that big a deal.
I think it's going for a more timeless look rather than a timely look. which is weird because it's supposed to be set
But
in
it's a
81.
period piece, so that makes no sense. If that was the goal, then that's a weird goal.
That is an issue too, because I think that's part of the portrayal. It's not necessarily in the delivery for that. Like you said, you're not sure about what time period it is, or even what exactly the message is. Like I said, I think the thing is the movie is trying to go for subtlety. Like the hook was 1981, most violent year. We're going to see a lot of violence. Ironically, there isn't any overt violence. There's subtle violence. Yeah. There's hinted violence. There's the idea of violence, which is very interesting. Mm-hmm. Like I said, potentially very interesting. And I guess maybe the director wasn't sure quite exactly where to go with that because he holds back a little bit.
Well, it falls into that age-old category of which is worse, a full-on bloodbath on screen or a really vicious sequence that comes out of nowhere.
No, I mean, and that's fine. I like the fact that there is really very little violence in the movie. That's not the point, though. And it's just like, really what it is
that I agree with.
Historically speaking, there is a lot of violence for the setting. And this is a man that's trying not to fall into that as it's around him. But, to be fair, other than like one thing somebody mentions in a scene dialogue with the district attorney, and the fact that his trucks are getting hijacked, we don't even hear anything on the radio or the TV about lots of violence. They say, oh yeah, a lot of rape and violence. Like, I don't see it. It's like this.
But it's not their story.
But even so, it's very confined. It's almost too confined. Mm-hmm. It seems like a much smaller story than it's trying to be. It's trying to be big and epic. It wants to be a Goodfellas. It wants to be Scorsese or something, but it's not quite because it's too confined.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, like I said, it's his story. It's not necessarily looking at it from the perspective of the entire city.
No.
And I feel like if that were the case, it would be an entirely different story.
No, and it's not looking from the perspective, but it's still trying to go with that feeling, that emotion, that idea. That's the backdrop. That's the hook. He's supposed to be part of the city. And that's what they're going for. You're right. It's not the city's story.
And we do see several different perspectives. It's not just told from his perspective.
No, there are many different stories.
His employees' perspective, Albert Brooks' perspective.
Which is where I was going with the consistency thing, focusing on that pretty big subplot that they keep kind of going back and forth with.
Yeah.
Later on with one of his employees, which was good and adds an interesting perspective come the end of it.
A very interesting perspective come the end of it, I think.
I'm glad it wrapped up because I actually thought they were going to end on the scene before that without having wrapped up his story. And just the way Chandor was framing it, it seemed like that was going to be the end of the movie.
I'm glad it wasn't.
I'm glad it wasn't too, because I was really not going to be happy with that.
Yeah, the ending they went for, I did think worked.
Yes, I do too, and that's actually I was about a B-, and then the final scene, I was like, all right, I'm glad that they wrapped that up nicely. Maybe nicely isn't the right word for it, but
well, I think the last shot really
appropriately
says a lot about the character's transformation in that final shot. I
agree.
It's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah,
and I think there's a lot of that in this movie, but it wasn't quite fused together as well as it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
On that, I think we can agree.
All right. Well, up next we have Project Almanac, and that is going to be with Justin.
David Raskin, played by Johnny Weston, is a young man trying to live up to his late father's talents by submitting a project worthy of MIT. While looking for inspiration from his father's experiments, he comes across what may be a time machine and attempts to exploit it with his friends for their own personal gain, eventually creating disastrous results. Like most contemporary found footage films, Project Almanac has an interesting concept, but gets bogged down by some really cheap effects, mediocre acting, and a plot that doesn't really have much going for it outside of the time travel element. And it wouldn't be so much of an issue if anyone besides Weston were anything more than one-dimensional and annoying. We get a kind of funny bit near the second act with one of the side characters, but for the most part they're just tacked on and we don't really know why. And that's partially because they just aren't given that much to do, and once it seems like there might be, they're gone. That said, the tension does build up over the course of the film, and it does have a relatively decent twist to wrap everything up, despite some of the noticeable flaws to get there. I give it a C+.
Joe, how about for you?
Well, I was actually kind of interested in this movie, and I think the best thing about it is the hook. I think a time travel found footage movie is interesting. Haven't really gone there before. But unfortunately, it just kind of falls into a lot of the same basic trappings we see with that particular style. It's just getting really annoying seeing it all the time, honestly. I think it's really overdone here. I thought the characters were okay. I do agree the acting wasn't particularly great, but you're right, there really isn't much going on with the story. The twist was alright. I just found myself not really particularly interested beyond the basic hook. I did think the effects were okay. I didn't think they were terrible, considering obviously the low budget. But I don't know. This movie was pretty by the numbers for me for the genre. I leave it with a C.
Well, I am much below you guys on this. I thought the time travel stuff didn't make any sense within its own rules. The film constantly changes those rules regarding it. The laws of physics, in some scenes, I don't understand who was holding the camera when certain things were happening.
Well, to be fair, with the constant shift in time, a lot of that footage shouldn't even really be there anyway.
Well, that is true. There's another gaping plot hole. Normal high school rules don't apply here. One character is repeatedly obnoxious to his science teacher with zero repercussions. The hot girl is a big nerd. The acting is terrible. I didn't think anyone did a good job. And Justin, you said it. These characters are all just completely one-dimensional or almost no-dimensional. I mean, some of them, are complete throwaways. I give it an F. It's awful.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I really didn't like it. The time travel inconsistencies didn't bother you guys?
The timeline still continues. There's just two separate ones creating a gigantic clash.
Yeah.
Which I think this was trying to go for, which many people versed in quantum physics will call shenanigans on all over, and probably rightfully so. But I mean, you do any time travel movie, people are going to have flaws with it. There are papers written about all the flaws
I understand
with Back
that.
to the Future.
I don't care. Have your own rules at least adhered to, mostly.
That is true.
About Time did a great job with that.
Yeah,
that's true.
Back to the Future, honestly, for a time travel movie,
pretty tight, yeah.
Back to the Future is pretty tight. I know you have issues with Men in Black 3. Those are understandable.
I was going to say, that's probably like the worst time travel movie to be
No, that would be Project Almanac. The rules that it sets out for itself are not followed.
I can't really defend that. I guess I just didn't care, to be honest.
Okay, that's possible. Sure.
I mean, you're right. Yeah, you're right. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all, but I don't think this movie's that smart anyway, so I guess I give it the benefit of the doubt.
It was distributed by MTV. We're not expecting Citizen Kane.
Well, Michael Bay was involved, so that's sort of a sign right there. And hey, hot girl's a nerd. Why don't you want to break stereotypes down? Not necessarily a bad thing, right? Come on. That's not necessarily a negative. Take that off. Come on. D-.
Well, yeah. Okay, first of all, that grade doesn't exist to me. So
I don't know. I thought the acting was all right. I mean, I think it's obviously amateurish.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. I thought
it is.
I thought they were all right.
I was going to say, I wouldn't say it's awful. It's certainly not good, but I mean, I wouldn't say it's
I think it's passable,
It's pretty bad. Listen, Jennifer Lopez in Boy Next Door is Golden Globe worthy compared to these kids.
Well,
and you gave that enough, so, none of these kids knew what they were doing. The characters were terrible.
Yeah.
They
weren't very well defined.
No, they weren't. Let's hear about Mordecai, Joe.
Oh. Mordecai is an action comedy film. I'd consider it more of an adventure, I guess. Directed by David Koepp and written by Eric Aronson. The film was adapted from the book anthology Don't Point That Thing at Me, written by Kirill Bufaglioli. Help me. It stars Johnny Depp in the title role and also features Gwyneth Paltrow, Ewan McGregor, Paul Bettany, and even Jeff Goldblum briefly. Lord Charlie Mordecai is an eccentric art dealer with a curly mustache. After returning to his home in London, Joanna, played by Paltrow, sees the mustache her husband has grown, and she is utterly repulsed by it, gagging whenever he kisses her. This is a continuous thing in the movie. In fact, it's even like a subplot. That's why I bring it up. After returning there, she ponders what they will do about their financial concerns. Here we learn how much Mordecai loves his wife. Also a big part. Meanwhile, a woman named Browen is working on a painting for the artist Goya, which just makes me think of like the rice beans, you find in the... I don't know. I just thought it was like... Honestly, I thought it was a connection. Like maybe it was funded by Goya. Maybe it was a painting of Goya canned beans. I don't know. When she's shot in the back with an arrow. After Browen expires, a thief swipes the painting and leaves her home when she is knocked out by yet another thief. Inspector Alistair Martland, that's Ewan McGregor, is put on the investigation to recover the painting. He visits Mordecai and asks for his services, and then they follow Mordecai on this crazy adventure to find out what's going on with this painting. Even though I read that synopsis, I'm not entirely sure what happened to this movie. I understood Mordecai is this eccentric art dealer, investigative person, kind of a quirky Sherlock Holmes sort of guy. Wealthy socialite who apparently doesn't get out of England and still thinks he's like in 1920 or something. He's kind of going for a Mr. Burns, really out of touch thing there, which and that's the biggest problem with this movie for me. There's this. It's really fast paced, so they're constantly throwing every kind of humor you can possibly imagine. There's potty humor, there's farce, there's slapstick, there's pretty much everything you can imagine. Some of the jokes work, a lot of them don't. The thing is, I think about Depp in this character, I think he's getting so stuck in playing these these caricatures of these ridiculous, over-the-top characters, and I think that's too comfortable for him. However, I thought some of the people in the movie did okay. I thought Depp was all right. I thought Gwyneth Paltrow was fine. She did have some good chemistry. McGregor's kind of there. Bettany's doing his thing. So, I mean, nobody's really particularly bad in the movie. It's just that it's incredibly messy. And I still do not know entirely what the point of the painting is, why it's such a big deal. Apparently there's terrorists going after that. I guess if they get it, they're going to finance terrorism. It's never really established, so I don't know why we care. That's the biggest issue with the movie. There's also some, like I said, the humor only works about 50% of the time, but I can't say I was particularly bored watching it. I was expecting a lot worse. I'll leave this one with a D+.
Okay. Yeah, I would say other than the confusing nature of the plot, because you're right, we never really know why this painting is so important.
Yeah.
But the biggest problem is it's ridiculously unfunny. There were a few parts I found a bit funny. I got one huge laugh out of it. But there's way too much time spent on the mustache humor.
Too much.
And the sex humor. I think this movie would have done itself a service to go for a PG-13 instead and make it a little more accessible, especially with who this character is compared to.
Was it R?
It was R. It was R. You know, I think they're going too much for...
I thought it was very
the sex stuff,
humor,
and that's the problem. The movie has no clear target audience. It could have been tightened a little bit to truly follow in the footsteps of a Clouseau or a Mr. Bean, like these PG-rated family type movies. If it had been toned down, went more the silly route rather than the stupid or raunchy route.
Yeah, that's true.
But I have to say, I thought Paul Bettany gave a fun performance, and you are correct, Joe. I don't think there's really necessarily a bad performance.
Not
I mean,
really.
Ewan McGregor's kind of, you're right. He adds nothing. It could have been played by anybody. But I thought Paltrow and Depp both did good jobs. Depp, I thought, was a little bit out of his comfort zone. He wasn't doing the Jack Sparrow thing. He was doing the other thing that he does, but not as frequent. I give it a D+ as well. Justin?
Well, what does it say about a movie when the straight-faced, punchy sidekick gets more entertaining, funny moments than the quirky, mustached-obsessed protagonist? Seriously, if it weren't for Paul Bettany, this movie probably would have been like a D-. Now, at some point in time, I feel like Mordecai might have been a lot of fun, maybe like in the 70s or 80s. But here in 2015, it's just a mediocre mishmash. The story's very confusing. Kep continues to be an underwhelming director since his last collaboration with Johnny Depp in what I consider his runner-up for the worst movie he's ever made ever, Secret Window.
It's not true, but...
Yeah, Joe likes Secret Window.
Yeah, I like Secret Window, so...
The story is still kind of fun to watch. I did laugh a couple times, but it was more like friendly chuckle than, oh my gosh, that was hilarious. I won't say it's been the worst thing that Depp's done in recent years, but it's not good. I'm gonna go D+ as well.
Yeah, what's funny is, I mean, in the Depp filmography, and we talked about his worst 5 movies last year when Transcendence came out. I mean, this is just kind of in the middle lately.
It's just been a...
When you put it next to, I know you like Lone Ranger as well, Joe, but Lone Ranger, Dark Shadows, everything that was on our list, it was just like...
I mean, people like to think that Depp has range. I'm not entirely sure if I can agree with that. He's very good at playing quirky, so much so that he essentially goes through the motions with all of his characters.
If you recall, there's Nick of Time, Donnie
I was
Brasco,
gonna
Public
say,
Yes, that was all circa 1990,
Right,
which was a much different time for Depp.
Also saying he doesn't have range, which he does. Which
Right, I think to the point is, he has not showed us his range in a good
20
15 years.
Yeah, 15, 20 years.
I can't say he doesn't have range. I mean, Edward Scissorhands, Nick of Time, you're right, is a great movie.
You're the first person I've ever heard say that, but
I've enjoyed
a lot. Great Christopher Walken, bad guy, yeah.
Well, of course, you know me, I love a real-time movie. But
the point is, Johnny Depp has range.
Yeah, I think he definitely has range. He just has not showed it to us recently. Now, I will say this. I know, Justin, you weren't a huge fan of his performance in Tusk. I did not like Tusk very much as a movie, but I did think that he was...
I actually
he was all right. I didn't know it was him for a moment.
It's not bad.
Let me put it to you like this.
That gives some range.
If Tusk wasn't directed by Kevin Smith, a Canadian, I would have accused Tusk of being racist because of that character.
Well, Canada's in a race. but prejudiced, maybe.
Sorry, excuse me. Prejudiced.
I mean, it's also
Self-parody.
a satire,
Canada.
I don't know. I mean, South Park makes fun of Canadians all the time.
Yeah, I mean,
Neither of them are Canadian. You love South Park.
Terrence
so...
and Phillip are much worse than
Right,
I think
exactly.
Johnny Depp
So
in that
that's-
movie. So
But here's the
I don't know
thing.
about
Terrence and
that.
Phillip are supposed to be terrible.
that's kind of what satire
But it's
is.
making fun of
Kind
Canada,
supposed to be
Justin.
bad, yeah.
It's making fun
In
of
the most
Canadians.
tasteless and obnoxious of ways.
Terrence and Phillip isn't tasteless?
Terrence and Phillip is supposed to be tasteless.
He's not
in
winning that one.
in a completely
No.
satirical way. Random, dumb Inspector Clouseau type character is just a tacked on footnote.
Justin, I just think that
That's borderline caricature.
you've got some issues with Depp, and that's fine. But the point is, at one point in time, he did have range.
I'm not denying that, but I'm sorry. It's right in this movie. It's basically Jack Sparrow as Inspector Clouseau.
No,
I'm sorry,
I don't
but it's
agree.
true.
I don't agree with that.
I thought the character was fine. I think that there were some issues with the script.
Yes.
I mean, but I do feel there was potential for a good movie here. I don't think it's really Depp's fault.
Tonto was Jack Sparrow in a Western.
Actually,
This
yeah.
is not a Jack Sparrow type character. I mean, it's quirky. Jack Sparrow is quirky. Mordecai is quirky. I'll give you that. But I mean, I don't think he's ripping from the Depp playbook as much in this as we've seen him do.
Oh, I'd
in
completely
many
argue
times.
that. It's basically him going through his quirk playbook. I'm going to say things I think are funny. I'm going to walk around like an idiot.
Well, he didn't write the script.
I didn't say he wrote the script, but
No,
his
but-
delivery's still a factor.
He was
Okay.
also directed a certain way too. You know, it's like do it this way. I will. You know.
But if you're going to blame it all on the director, I'm sorry. The director can only do so much once the cameras are rolling.
But
It's
so
a
can the
mixed bag.
scriptwriter. I mean,
Are you
it's
kidding?
not a funny movie.
Are you kidding? The scriptwriter is lucky if anything he actually wrote down actually makes it to screen.
Because
I would not blame the screenwriter for
Well,
this at all. I
well,
would blame the fact that Kep is a crappy director.
Justin, it's a film is
But
an
it's not a
evolution
funny
process.
movie.
You know.
Yes, I would blame that on Cap and Depp.
But the script, the
And
jokes
not
that were written,
the script that sucks has nothing to do with the scriptwriter.
we don't. The thing is, we don't know exactly.
What makes it to screen is not always the script. There are many, many really good scripts out there that have been tweaked and altered into terrible, terrible movies.
Justin, there are also really bad scripts out there that make it completely.
Yeah,
on the
I
stage.
won't deny
It's
that.
true.
But unless you are friends with the scriptwriter, you don't know how much of the movie was written by the scriptwriter.
The
I
point
would
is-
Have
assume
you ever
probably
seen
some.
Have you ever read a script that made it to screen? Compare the two. You
Hey.
will see dramatic differences.
The point is,
Every movie's different.
from the process,
Is the point.
from
I'm
the
not
pre-production
denying that.
on to the point where it got now, the movie was flawed, and I'm sure that many people were at fault. Right
Yes.
now, you know, I mean,
Absolutely.
somewhere along the line, something went wrong. I personally think it was probably, I mean, if those were the jokes that were written and the way that they were delivered, I think both those factors were an issue. But I don't think the performers were really that bad. Is what I'm saying.
I don't either. I don't hate the character.
No,
I really don't. I mean, obviously,
No.
with the box office of this. But I mean, if they did another Mordecai movie, I would still see it. I mean, I didn't hate the character.
Yeah.
I just hated
he's
what was
not
in the movie.
bad. He's just incredibly outdated.
I'll agree with that.
Yes, Lord.
I'll agree with that. But again, I do think he's to say that Depp has no range. Maybe this isn't the greatest example of his range, but we know the guy has range. Whether he's shown it or not in the last decade is open to interpretation,
It's
I
still
suppose. Yeah. All right, well, up next is our first of two home media moments, and that is the Grand Seduction. In the small town of Ticklehead, Newfoundland, there is no bigger supporter of the town than resident Murray French, played by Brendan Gleeson. The problem is, it's a town on the verge of financial collapse, and a chemical factory that's been in the works for years may be the way out of poverty, but the town needs a doctor before they can be approved for the factory. And after 8 years, nobody has stepped up. Meanwhile, a plastic surgeon, Dr. Paul Lewis, played by Taylor Kitsch, gets stopped at a Canadian airport with cocaine on him. The security agent happens to be the former mayor of Ticklehead, and aware of the town's problem, cuts a deal with Dr. Lewis to live there for a month, and he can go free on the drug charge. Murray, then with the town's support, finds out what Dr. Lewis is into and attempts to pull the wool over his eyes that they're all just like him, in the hopes that maybe he will stay on as the town doctor. It seems a bit convoluted from that synopsis, and it is, but it's also not all that different from comedies that have come before, like Doc Hollywood, for example. The main problem the Grand Seduction has, though, is that it's kind of cute and charming, but it isn't really very funny. It has some good moments. Gleeson, of course, throws himself into the role. It's got some beautiful landscapes, But the best thing I can say about it is it's pleasant. I give it a B-. Joe?
You know, that's actually a very good way to put it. It's very much how I felt about the movie. Like,
Okay.
The movie is very nice.
It is.
It's a very nice movie. I do think it truly is a grand seduction. I remember, like, I didn't know anything about the movie, so I kept thinking, I just saw Gleason and this other guy, and I'm like, is this a romance?
It was like Brokeback Mountain all over
It's
again.
like Son of a Woman, where it's like, there's a line about it, but it's actually nothing like the title.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was actually really interesting to see, like, it's really about this awesome facade, you know, this poor little town is to try and trick this doctor into staying so they can get their factory, and they really want to please him, and it's just, and seeing them do that, I thought was very charming, you know, and it's not like laugh out loud funny, but it made me smile. You know, of course, you're right, Gleason's always great.
Always good.
I thought a lot of the supporters were great. I will admit, though, until I looked up the synopsis, I thought it was in Ireland because some of the Newfie accents are terrible.
Yeah, that is true.
I just was like, because Gleason would fade out. Like, okay, he's kind of holding it out, and then he goes Irish. I'm like, okay, some Irish fishing town takes place in Newfoundland.
What?
No,
Yep.
that's not Canada, guys. So, regardless of where it takes place, I think it was pretty decent. I'm gonna leave it with a B.
Okay.
I think it's a good movie, but you're right. It's like it's been on territory we've gone before,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But great Doc Hollywood reference.
Thank you. I enjoyed that movie very much.
That's a very good movie, actually.
Yes. Justin, how about for you on Grand Seduction?
Well, I think in a shocking upset, we won't see too much fighting on this review. I mean, the story is far from original material, but it's mostly fun because just about everyone's on board. Gleason does his best to elevate the rather cliche and familiar material, and the result is, for the most part, entertaining. Some of the jokes are good, provided you're willing to buy into the completely unbelievable plot.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the story's completely predictable, and the conclusion more or less nosedives into every comedy cliche imaginable.
True.
I don't regret watching it, but I have no burning desire to watch it again. I give it a C+.
I feel like it's a cute but forgettable movie.
More or less, yeah.
You know, like when we do our, well, of course this counts for 2014, which is why we're sort of doubling up on these home media moments.
You'll probably
the
never
last
hear
couple
about
weeks.
this again.
But by the end of this year, you know, 2015, when we look back and see all the home media moments, I'll be like, it'll be one of those where I have to ask Justin what it was from the title.
And Justin may not remember.
Oh, no, I'm usually pretty good about that.
That's good.
But yeah, it's just it's good and it's cute, but it's been done before, and I just don't think there's much to write home about. I do think every time I see Taylor Kitsch doing something that isn't Battleship, you know, some of his earlier movie roles. I mean, I liked John Carter, but obviously it was kind of a punchline for a while. So you know, he's good in this and gives it his all, but his character's pretty, you know, basic and
You know how
what
it's
you'd
gonna
expect. Yeah. And it is very predictable. You're right about that, Justin. All right, well, that will lead us into our second home media moment for the week, and that is Frontera. Justin's going to tell us about that.
After his wife, played by Amy Madigan, is murdered by accident, former Sheriff Roy, played by Ed Harris, searches for the truth in Miguel, played by Michael Pena, who she was last seen talking with before her death. However, in Roy's pursuit, new details come to light from unlikely sources that cause him to rethink who he can actually trust and how severe justice should be served. Frontera's a surprisingly good low-budget drama tackling a big issue in a really unique way, and keeping the preachiness of the material down to a minimum, which I really, really liked. While I've certainly seen better performances from Harris and Pena, both really keep the story lively and, for the most part, pretty believable, adding in this intensity in terms of the overall situation, dealing with the overall dilemmas of the film from both sides. That said, Harris's story is a bit more focused on the bigger story, whereas Pena's adds on a subplot with his wife, played by Eva Longoria, that just is kind of tacked on. It's important, and it's got a purpose, but it's not quite as pivotal as the central story. And it all boils up to a conclusion that's a little cheesy, but in a kind of entertaining way. Overall, I'd say it's worth a watch for all of its flaws. I give it a B.
Joe, how about for you on Frontera?
Well, I think you said it pretty well, Justin. I think it is tackling a subject that has been, you know, focused on before, but trying to tell both sides while having kind of this compelling mystery drama and seeing it unfold for both sides. I agree. I mean, I've seen Harris and Pena do better, but they do good here. You know, they do fairly good. Play off each other pretty well. But I think the thing about this movie is that it does touch on these ideas, but it doesn't really go deep enough in them because the main story is between Harris and Pena's characters, but it's bogged down by this little story that is basically Pena's wife's story, which is this interesting kind of thriller subplot that doesn't really jive with the rest of the movie and kind of seems to be really out of place and not handled very well. I mean, in and of itself could have been fascinating, but it kind of takes away time we really need for Harris's story. And so the ultimate evolution of his character doesn't feel quite as powerful as it could be. I thought the ending was okay. I liked how it wrapped up, but I thought it was pretty cliche and standard, and I've seen it done many times before. Altogether, though, because of the performances and the narrative, I thought it was okay. I leave it with a B.
Okay. Well, you'll hear some echoing here. I'm not sure if the filmmakers were trying to make a message movie that is also entertaining, or if they were going for an entertaining movie that happens to have a message. So I think it's a little bit at odds with itself there because
Definitely.
You're right. You know, the Longoria side story.
Interesting.
It is interesting,
But-
and I love to see Longoria in anything, but the real meat of the story was not there. But you're both right. The performances from the two male leads are decent, but we've all seen them do, much better things. I thought it was also shot very darkly.
For Texas or wherever they are.
Yeah, and that was a little bit confusing in certain spots because it was hard to see like exactly what was even happening.
There were a lot of random close-ups. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So I'm with you guys. I give it a B as well. I liked watching it. It made me think. But other than a fantastic tense final moment, unlike you, Joe, I haven't maybe seen as many of these types of movies. So I thought the final showdown was actually pretty cool. But other than that, and the Harris Pena story, the rest is kind of a throwaway or just maybe belongs in a different movie.
Mm-hmm.
So like I
Pretty
said,
much.
it's a B for me as well. But I'm definitely with you. Mm-hmm.
I'm glad I saw it. I did like it. I just wasn't...
It's good. It's just got
not,
some relatively noticeable flaws and a subplot that doesn't really need to be there.
That pretty much sums it up. It's pretty good
It's true.
for what it is.
And it is an important subplot to the story, but it could have been told in a minute, really. I mean, we didn't need to have a whole side plot
Like
with
20
it.
or 30 minutes devoted to it. It
Yeah.
just makes the main story suffer a bit. Honestly.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, we're going to do our top 5 now, and this week we're looking at Best Pictures from the last 25 or so years. For the first time ever on the show, all 3 of our triple feature films are or were nominated for Best Picture, and actually our Oscar A to Z movie, Around the World in 80 Days, won the Best Picture trophy. So we're going to look at our 5 picks for movies that should have won over the movie that did win. So, Joe, let's start with you for this.
Number 5 would be from 2012. That would be Argo was the winner. I wish Lincoln would have won. Now, admittedly, I think they're both very good movies. This was a very close call. But I feel like, on reflection, I liked Lincoln more. Even though Argo holds together really well and is interesting, I think that the story Lincoln's trying to tell is more important. And I think Daniel Day-Lewis gives a far better performance than anybody in Argo. So, for that alone, I think that really holds it up. Number 4, No Country for Old Men won. That was in 2007. I personally wish There Will Be Blood would have won because I think it's a powerful drama. And I will admit, No Country for Old Men is good, but I've only ever seen it once, and I found it kind of boring, honestly. Now, granted, I should go back to that one, but There Will Be Blood really stuck with me more, so that's there. My number 3 was from 1992. Unforgiven was the winner. Well, I think Son of a Woman should have won because that movie is a fantastic drama. One of my favorites, top 25.
That's true.
Had to put it on. Don't get me wrong. Unforgiven, great Western, great Eastwood, but Son of a Woman is just a really, really good movie. Number 2, from 96, well, The English Patient won. I say Fargo should have won because you know what? English Patient was long and boring. Fargo is witty, fun, interesting, very unique. I think it stood out more for the year than The English Patient.
All right, well, I will go next. Good choices thus far. I have not seen some of those films. We sort of made a rule here that you had to have seen the Best Picture winner to be able to kick it out. So English Patient, I'm sure, is awful, but I've never seen it, so I can't kick it out.
It was a long time ago, I admit, but it was very, very boring.
That's all I've heard. Not just from the Seinfeld episode, but just in life.
They weren't wrong.
Yeah. I have a couple of honorable mentions. Movies that I think should have won, But the movie that did win is also an A+, so it's hard to really say that. And that's honestly the last 3 years of winners. I thought The Descendants should have won over The Artist, Silver Linings over Argo, American Hustle over 12 Years a Slave, but all six are fantastic movies, so it's hard for me to really, put them in the category. My number 5 comes from 2010, and that's The King's Speech ended up winning. I thought actually 2 movies could have beaten it. The one I'm going to pick for this list is Black Swan. The other one was Toy Story 3. They're both excellent films. Both, probably in my top 25 of all time. King's Speech is good, but it's what I would consider more of a classical Academy choice. Black Swan was a little bit more of a thriller. They don't usually shine the light on that. Yeah. Number 4 for me, 1994, Forrest Gump won. It's really one of the best years in film, I think, in recent history. So there's many good choices for what could have won. I would pick Pulp Fiction. I thought Tarantino really, really changed the game with that one. And, everything that we've always said about Pulp Fiction in these top 5s. Number 3, from 2009, instead of The Hurt Locker, I believe Up should have been the first ever Best Picture animated film. Up is just a masterpiece. Every frame is fantastic, and really, for a opening scene of 10 or 12 minutes with virtually no dialogue, it's more touching than anything you'll see in a lot of other movies. Number 2 for me, Joe, I also kicked No Country for Old Men out. I agree with you. I thought it was okay. Don't really have any interest in seeing it again, and for Coen Brothers films, it's among my least favorite. But the movie I pick in its place is Juno. I know Justin's skin is crawling at this notion, but I thought Juno, the Academy really doesn't like their comedies, and I think of any comedy that was nominated in the last 20, 25 years, I think Juno probably deserved it. Justin?
Okay, so the 63rd Academy Awards for movies in 1990, Goodfellas over Dances with Wolves. I put this at number 5 because I think it's great movie versus great movie, but I feel like this was really Scorsese showing how far he's come as a filmmaker, really improving on all the stuff he's built on. And I feel like it's honestly among the many, many ridiculous Scorsese snubbings in Oscar history.
And as we know, you do not like that he won for The Departed, so that would be...
Should have given it to Goodfellas.
Yeah, that would be a good...
exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Did think about putting that one on there, but I was fine with Dances with Wolves.
Number 4, the 67th Academy Awards for movies in 1994. The Shawshank Redemption over Forrest Gump.
That would be the other good choice, yep.
Great movie versus great movie, well, at least from my perspective. But I feel like Shawshank was truly the full package. How this got shut out completely is beyond a tragedy to me. So many great performances, such a well-written script. This should have gotten so much more credit than it did. For number 3, the 74th Academy Awards, which was for movies in 2001, Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring over A Beautiful Mind.
Yeah.
Peter Jackson gave audiences a complete powerhouse of a first installment of a great franchise. Now, don't get me wrong, Howard threw together a fine film, but I feel like the tone was a bit unfocused at times and a really weird subplot that ties together later on, but I feel like there were better ways to handle it. And I'm still annoyed that it took this and Two Towers to finally get it for Return of the King, which I think we can all agree is kind of bloated. Yeah. Good movie still, but...
Fellowship's the best one.
I would say my favorite of any of the Middle-earth saga is the first movie.
It's the best movie.
Mm-hmm.
And my number 2 for the 79th Academy Awards for 2006 movies, Babel over The Departed. I've been arguing ever since that The Departed won out of Academy pity, had a perfect opportunity with Goodfellas, with Taxi Driver. This, don't get me wrong, Departed's a good movie, but Best Picture, questionable. It was my first ever viewing of an Alejandro Iñárritu movie, and I feel like he just gave audiences this really complex and engrossing story that only improves as the scale blows up over the course of the film. I've only ever seen it once, and I still think about it. It's a really unique and powerful movie.
Well, it will be coming up in, probably about 6 months' time in our Oscar A to Z. I've never seen it, but I do love The Departed, so... Joe, I know, is not much of a fan, but...
No, I like a third of the movie.
I guess we'll hear about that in a few months' time. Joe, how about your number one? What is the most egregious offense?
Well, the most egregious offense is the most obvious offense. Don't get me wrong, 94 was a great year for movies. Pulp Fiction I'm perfectly fine with if that had won. But Shawshank Redemption is one of the greatest movies of all time. Pretty much everybody knows this and accepts this. So maybe it's okay that it didn't win. Forrest Gump is a good movie. But, Shawshank Redemption is just a powerful, epic masterpiece. I mean, it's perfect.
I think Forrest Gump is highly overrated.
It is a bit overrated. I mean, don't get me wrong, good movie, but you look at Forrest Gump and then you look at Shawshank Redemption, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, they're in two different leagues.
They are, yeah.
All right, well, my number one is a pretty common choice for a terrible Best Picture winner. Maybe not terrible, but the classic should not have won, and that's Crash. 2005 was a good year for movies, but I'm sorry, Brokeback Mountain was a fantastic piece of cinema. And Crash, I've seen once. I thought it was okay. I've seen Brokeback 4 times. Gets me every time. Heath Ledger, I'll be honest, should have won his Oscar for that and not the Joker. But for Best Picture, it's definitely Brokeback over Crash for me. Justin?
Well, my number one is from the 82nd Academy Awards for 2009 movies, and that is Up in the Air over The Hurt Locker.
Oh, another great choice from that year.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, I'm probably going to get a little bit of flack for this, but my personal theory with how The Hurt Locker won was I feel like the Academy wanted to pave the way for feminist filmmakers. Don't get me wrong, I think Catherine Bigelow is a fantastic director, but I feel like the Best Picture award should go for the best caliber movies and not what they represent, which seemed to be the crux of that entire year in the Academy. But Brightman just gave us this original and prominent story with a really clever commentary, and yet shines an optimistic light on a rather grim subject matter. And it's one of the few films I saw on DVD and immediately regretted not watching earlier.
It's a great movie, and Up in the Air from that year were both better than Hurt Locker. I like The Hurt Locker a lot, I do.
Oh, it's a good movie.
And it's way better than Avatar, so I'm glad that didn't win. But, yeah, you're right. Up in the Air is probably, I know I'm partial to The Descendants, but it's probably the best George Clooney movie.
Yeah, it's pretty
I would say.
For his performance.
Yeah. All right, well, fun lists all around. Maybe every year come Oscar season we'll pick a different category and do the same thing. But right now we have our triple feature of older films, and we kick that off with an Oscar nominee for Best Picture from 2 years ago, and that is Captain Phillips. And Joe's going to tell us about that.
Captain Phillips, Can You Hear Me? is a 2013 American thriller film directed by Paul Greengrass, who is Justin's favorite, and starring Tom Hanks and Barkhad Abdi. The film is inspired by the true story of the 2009 Marsk, Alabama hijacking, an incident during which merchant mariner Captain Richard Phillips was taken hostage by pirates in the Indian Ocean, led by Adewale Muse. I think this movie holds together very well. I really did enjoy it the first time I saw it, and I still do. I think that it holds together because it's a very realistic portrayal. It feels very genuine, and I guess because it was actually based on the memoirs, they hold very true to that. It feels like it's very naturalistic in that sense. And I feel that, I believe we talked about it when we reviewed the movie before, but Abdi, as a new actor with, I think, a completely amateur.
No experience whatsoever.
Completely ignored in the Oscars. I really feel like he should have gotten some acknowledgement because he does a great job. I really think that they do an excellent job showing two different perspectives and seeing that it's not all black and white. I mean, no pun intended there. But really, that these situations are difficult to kind of figure out, honestly. Mm-hmm. But there's real tension here, and I feel... Personally, I know that Justin has issues with some of the editing and cinematography choices, but I felt that for the close quarters of the film, it really does add to the tension and realism, especially once they get into the little safety pod. It made it seem like there really was a lot more room in that area than there really was. So I really did enjoy that. I thought Hanks gives a great performance, as usual, especially towards the end. It really gets to shine with the true power of it. I really enjoyed this movie. I don't really have any negatives about it. I mean, maybe it's a little too long, but I don't know. I really enjoyed it. I leave it with an A-.
Yeah, I guess this was just last year's Oscars. I said 2 years ago, but
yeah,
it's a 2013 movie because that's 2 years ago. But right, it was just last year's Oscars. I have to say, I mean, Abdi does a fantastic job, but Jared Leto won Best Supporting last year. I thought that was worthy for sure. But my favorite thing about this movie, other than the realism, is that I know Justin's going to put a bullet in his brain when I say this, but Greengrass really knows how to fill the screen with a limited space. We saw it in 1993. We see it in an even more confined space with the last half of Captain Phillips. Now, the shakiness of the camera is a little bit much, but you're also out at sea, so maybe some choppiness is reflective of what the characters are experiencing. My favorite thing about the movie, though, other than the great performances, is how Greengrass keeps it so tight. It is riveting from the moment they get on the Maersk, Alabama, about 10 minutes into the film. We get just a taste of Captain Phillips' home life, but we don't linger on it. We get right into the action pretty quickly, and it keeps us there. I give Captain Phillips an A- as well. Justin?
Well, Dan, I'm glad that you spoke so highly of Greengrass, because here's one word to describe my reaction to Greengrass's directing style on this film. Suffocating. Now, I understand trying to create a more personal feel, but when the story takes place on a giant ship and has less space than Fury in a tank or Das Boot in a submarine, Greengrass needs to vary his shots and stop with the infuriatingly obvious attempts to throw in a "what do you think the American dream is" agenda. But fortunately, the story is still powerful, it's got a lot of tension, and the characters do a great job. I said it when we originally reviewed, and I still stand on it, that audiences should come for Hanks and stay for everyone else who completely blow him out of the water, but it's still a good film with more than a few noticeable issues that completely shut it out from greatness. I give it a B.
I will ask you this, though. When you say everyone else that blows Hanks out of the water, other than Barkhad Abdi, who's better than Tom Hanks in this movie? All the other
his
pirates?
Crewmates, the other pirates, the medic at the end of the movie,
The medic
who's
was
not
good.
even an actor and completely
He
outacts
did a
him.
good job, but...
Yeah, but in that scene, that was a crucial scene where Hanks really shone.
Yeah, I think that was probably his
I
best
mean, the
scene.
medic was good for being, a
U.S.
non-actor, but...
Navy, medic.
But, I mean, Hanks gives the best performance of that film in that scene.
Yeah.
She does not outshine him at all.
I mean, really,
I couldn't agree less.
all the other actors.
I mean,
have,
I'll give you the
couple
fact that
scenes.
it's the only time in the film where he pulls something together in the last 20 minutes.
No, I didn't say that. I said it's his best scene in the movie. I didn't say that's the only time he did something.
Okay.
I thought he was good all throughout. He's Tom Hanks.
Well, you originally phrased that as best performance in the movie, which I'm not entirely sure if I agree with.
That scene is his best performance in the movie, yes.
Well, I thought you were referring to best performance in the movie as a whole, which
Well, he's
I'm
Tom
not entirely
Hanks,
sure if I agree with.
I think he's probably the best performer in the movie.
He's an A-lister, I'll give you
No, I
that.
said
but
other than Barkhad Abdi, who is better than Hanks in that movie. I
Yeah.
don't agree that his crew is better than him.
in terms of complete rookies, I mean, their entire plot in the first part of the overall takeover is really packed with intensity. When they go into the safety pod, which is basically an hour and 10 minutes of shaky cam, it just drags.
I will admit that it does go on a little bit long when they're in the pod. That's probably the reason it doesn't get an A from me, because it's really one of the few complaints I have with the film. It is a little overlong in that last hour, I will admit, and it gets a little repetitive.
The safety pod scene's repetitive. The driving scene, which begins the whole "what do you think the American dream is" agenda, is beyond tacked on and pointless.
I thought that was pretty crucial to the
I
dynamic
mean, it was
between
kind
the two
of,
of them.
yeah, it was,
Not really. I mean,
Only in America.
we get a scene. We get a scene later on where he's emailing his wife. That goes on for maybe 30 seconds. Gives us everything that scene was trying to accomplish in so much less time, because it does essentially everything that the opening 5-minute driving scene, which has no business being in the movie whatsoever. If you want to keep it, make it a deleted scene at least.
I don't know. I think it was fine. Good opener.
I mean, it sets up his character a little bit.
I think it shows the long journey because he drives to the airport, then he's on the airport going out to sea, then he's on a boat going. He's really, really far from home. Conveyed that pretty well.
It's true.
When there's at least 8 scenes I can think of right off the top of my head that they can nix, no problem, won't miss a thing, and it'll flow so much better.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't refute that it's a little overlong.
A little bit.
But I think Hanks gives a fantastic performance here.
I wasn't bored in it,
Yeah.
so I don't know.
I'm just saying I feel like it drags pretty significantly in some spots until really springing to life in those last 20 minutes.
All right, well, the Captain Phillips debate rolls on as it has for the last year plus.
Yep.
Okay, up next is my pick for Old Classic, And I really did not do this intentionally thinking we were going to have all 3 Best Picture nominated films. It's Oscar month. Justin has never seen this movie, and I just thought that was a shame. So I brought along Precious, based on the novel Push by Sapphire. It's a 2009 film produced by Oprah Winfrey and Tyler Perry and directed by Lee Daniels of Lee Daniels' The Butler fame. Precious tells the story of an obese, very poor, and illiterate teenage girl in Harlem in the 1980s, played by Gabourey Sidibe in her Oscar-nominated role, as she experiences being pregnant from a rape by the boyfriend of her mother, played by Monique in her Oscar-winning role, and tons of abuse from her mom as well, physical, verbal, and emotional. Precious already has a baby with Down syndrome from being raped by her father and has been encouraged to attend an alternative school for girls in various hard situations. Paula Patton plays the encouraging teacher at Precious's new school. Mariah Carey has a supporting role as a social worker, and Lenny Kravitz appears as a nurse's aide. Precious is easily one of the hardest films to swallow. It is depressing, and it is heartbreaking, probably mostly because it reflects real life and a slice of it that is rarely portrayed with such brutal honesty. Daniels captures the era and the attitudes of the time perfectly. The film has a couple lighthearted moments, mainly with Precious's inner life, in which she sees herself as a superstar or a beautiful blonde, and it takes the audience inside her coping mechanism to being abused. Sidibe's nomination and especially Monique's win at the Oscars are beyond deserved. Precious is not an easy watch, but it needs to be seen. It's one of the best dramas in recent years. I give it an A. Justin, how was your first experience with Precious, based on the novel Push by Sapphire?
When I first met Dan, this was one of the movies he would constantly pester me to watch, and now I completely understand why. Lee Daniels gives us a character filled with demons, and yet struggles to hold on to her dreams. Sometimes I think Daniels spends a little too much time in these fantasies, and the argument could be made that he may have manipulated the material to be happier than it actually is come the end of it, but it is a very well done drama with a great breakout performance from Sidibe. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. I give it a B+.
Here comes the attack.
It just seems a bit low for everything you just said about it. I don't know.
He didn't like the fantasy sequences.
I didn't like it either. It brought me from an A+ to an A. That's the only thing that's wrong with the movie to me.
Well, like I said, I also mentioned that he may have manipulated the material to be happier than it actually is.
Well, yeah, it's a movie.
Well, I mean,
it's a pretty depressing movie. I wouldn't say...
Is it? I mean, he basically twists the ending, so we have a kind of happy ending, even though it's not really happy at all.
Joe, we'll get to you in a second.
Because I probably have an answer for you. But keep going.
Her whole life is miserable.
I'm not denying that.
Is the end of the movie some sort of silver lining for her? Possibly. I wouldn't say that's a happy ending. It is still a very, very depressing life for her ahead, and that is clear.
Yes and no. I mean, they're playing up the whole, like, oh, yes, she sort of gets what she wants, but she's not in the end game.
Yes, and that's what life is, and this is a very realistic movie.
I'm not denying that it's not realistic.
You're saying that he is putting a happy spin on it?
Yes.
I don't think that he is. Joe, let's go to you, and then we'll continue this discussion.
All right. Well, the fantasy sequences I thought were fine. I thought there were actually enough of them. You have to kind of add some happiness because this movie is incredibly depressing. But I would say the ending isn't necessarily happy. It's uplifting because she goes through all these horrible experiences, but she's still striving. She still makes something of herself, and she's struggling, and that's what's inspirational about it. I thought everything about this movie is great. The performances are wonderful, and you're right. It's so realistic that it's disturbing, actually, because it's very believable. I would disagree with you, though, Dan. I don't know if it really exudes the time very well, because until you told me it took place in the 80s, I did not realize that.
That's true.
I would say it's even better.
My problem with Most Violent Year, I guess.
It's a very timeless movie, because it's not overly imbued with 80s stuff. I guess some of the outfits in a couple scenes, but really...
the cultural references, that's true.
But to be honest, I didn't think it was really that overt. Sadly, because the situation in some urban cities or even in rural areas
has not changed.
People are very cut off, and it might seem like it's 30 years ago. And because of that, I just think we really need more truthful stories like that. Yes, there's some Oscar baiting, if you will, little uplifting moments there, but you kind of need them, and I think that it's really awesome to have that contrast for her. I actually give Precious an A+.
Awesome.
I think it's a fantastic movie. I really don't have any issues with it. I mean,
So-
I'll admit I was never going out to watch it again because
Right.
it was so depressing for me to watch. But I'm like, wow, this movie is so real. You don't see something this real out there, and I mean, really, it's fantastic. It's quite brave, I think.
My only problem with the fantasy sequences is sort of how they're interjected. I like that they're there, and like I said, it really brings us into her only coping mechanism.
It's a little
More or
like
less, yeah.
cartoony, I guess.
But yeah, it's a little cartoony. It's sort of the problem that we all seem to have with a couple of the Walter Mitty fantasy sequences.
Yeah, but I didn't think
You
that
know.
there were too many. I mean,
But that's all.
it
That's
was
the only problem I have
a
with the
little
whole movie.
stylistic, but I enjoyed them. I thought they were colorful compared to the darkness of everything else.
The one thing I
true.
thought was really good, though, about the fantasy sequences was Daniels had some genius transitions to get into those fantasy sequences, which I really, really liked. But like I said, even though you're saying it's uplifting, it's really not, given everything that's going to be coming next. It's one of those, yes, she accomplishes what she wants, but we all know it's not going to end well. So it's like, way to make a unhappy ending feel happy when it's not there at all.
Well, I don't think that's the point. I mean, that's the way life is. You're not going to get the happy ending. But the point is, she started off in a much worse situation, and it did get better. And because she worked for it, she believed in herself. I think that's
And
the core
she
of it.
is a very optimistic character, which we see from these fantasy sequences.
That's how you get
Even
to the
with-
movie.
With everything else that's going on in her life, she is very optimistic. So I can't deny that maybe the ending is optimistic. If you want to say uplifting, okay.
I like that.
But I think I agree that her life still sucks,
It's
and
horrible.
it's not going to get that much better. But what's wrong with having a little optimism in there?
I'm fine with a little optimism, but let's not let's not pretend there's something there that isn't.
What do you
It's
mean by
not
that?
going to get better. I don't know why he chose to cut it off at there.
Certain things in her life are better, though.
Yeah.
Certain things
You
in her
can't
life are
deny
better.
that.
However, they're not going to be better for much longer
Well, she
without
can
giving anything
read,
away. Yeah, she can
so
read.
that's one thing.
It's a
I
start,
can't
but-
give away too many spoilers, but reading, she can do that
It's a
now.
step in the right direction,
Yeah.
For her, at least, it gets
for
better.
for a time, yes.
Maybe so, but that's not the point. For her, it's like you get from this horrible place. For her, where she is at the end is eons better than where she was at the beginning of the movie. For her, it's a complete life change. That's what matters.
Yes, it was a life change, but like I said, he basically cuts it short by basically saying, "Oh yes, look at her happy with what she has now." Cut to 3 months later, it's not going to end okay.
How do we know that?
See, I don't know that. We don't necessarily know it's going to be bad. I mean, it might not be easy from there on, but people can, enter into harsh elements of their life and still come out on top, even with these other struggles they come across.
I'll say it like this, Justin. I, for one, after watching that movie, don't come out of it saying
She's doomed.
Man, she is really on the top of the heap now. I come out thinking how far she's come.
That's the point, I think.
And so I think, to me, that's what Daniels was trying to portray.
Which is nice, and I get that, but it's more like, but for me, it's more or less of a going up the roller coaster only to fly right back down.
Not necessarily, though.
I think that's a negative attitude to take from the movie, personally.
I think it's a negative perspective. I understand what you're saying, but I mean, that's just one way to look at it.
It's not that I'm saying her journey was wasted. The way her character progresses and the support of the cast, I thought was great. Kravitz does a great job. Mariah Carey does a really good job.
She does.
Monique does a great job of playing flat-out evil human being.
Monique,
Yeah.
you guys probably aren't as familiar with Monique's, stand-up and comedy as I am.
No,
but,
you got me on that one.
She is a comedian only. This, Lee Daniels plucked her out of this, just like he did Mariah Carey, and said, okay, you've never acted before except in that Glitter movie. Why don't you do this very dramatic role? He's got an eye for what people are capable of. I would have never in a million years thought Monique could play this. She does movies like Welcome Home, Roscoe Jenkins with Martin Lawrence. That's Monique's wheelhouse. This was just ridiculously good.
Wow.
Completely
Yeah.
out of her element. I mean,
Yeah.
it speaks to some varying degree of Lee Daniels' ability as a director. I mean,
Yes, it does.
We've all raved about The Butler, but
Yeah. That's funny because you, I believe, gave The Butler also a B+.
that's correct.
I think this movie's... I gave The Butler an A originally, dropped it down to an A- at the end of the year, but this movie is much superior, I think, to The Butler.
Well, here's the thing. With Precious Fur, I'd say about the first half of the movie, I was thinking, easy A-. No question. Dream sequences, a little heavy-handed, but love the cinematography in them. How he utilizes that to bring us into the story and finding ways to help us understand this character. However, they do come relatively inconsistently. And then just when I thought I was really set on this A-, this heart-wrenching, deep, raw character study gets cut short.
I feel there was enough of it there to have a good character arc for you, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, I think she came leaps and bounds, and I feel like the ending is hitting us two completely different ways.
Yeah.
In two different perspectives, and I think, personally, for me, I mean, I'm glad you saw the movie. I'm glad I got to show it to you. I think a B+ is honestly harsh for this movie.
No, I mean, I don't regret watching it.
I would hope not. It's a great movie.
Yeah.
Some would say A+. All right, well, let's get to the Oscar A to Z movie. It's from 1956. It's Around the World in 80 Days, nominated for 8 Academy Awards. It won 5 of those. Adapted screenplay, color cinematography, film editing, music, and the coveted Best Picture. It was also nominated in categories for art direction, costume design, and Best Director. Justin?
Phileas Fogg, played by David Niven, makes a bet of £20,000 to his colleagues at the London Reform Club that he can travel around the world in 80 days and be back at the approximate same time. Joining Fogg is his new valet, Passepartout, played by Cantinflas, as the two have a series of mishaps from bullfighting to being chased by the law. Now, I feel like with epics from the 50s and 60s, it was all about spectacle, spectacle, spectacle. The locales for this film are gorgeous, and the film has more than a couple stylistic tricks up its sleeve, but at slightly below 3 hours, some get more time than others, and the journey is exhausting. There's a lot of really interesting things going on here, but I mean, it's more or less slightly better made fluff. The story's still fun, but the film runs at least 45 minutes too long, and I give it a B.
Joe, how about for you?
I know that Justin likes to point out that the 50s movies is all about spectacle. I was actually looking over the Oscar nominations, and that year also up for Best Picture were Ben-Hur and The Ten Commandments. Now, those are two films that are about spectacle and also have great characters and great story that I was into despite the long running time. Now, granted, both of those were heavily biblical. One's directly biblical, one indirectly. So obviously some great stories to draw off of, but still powerhouses. Both fantastic movies. Hopefully we'll see Ben-Hur fairly soon.
Yeah.
If I don't run it beforehand. The thing about this movie, I actually did read the book a long time ago, and I remember thinking that the novel really does have this interesting story. And the best thing about it was you actually got to see these characters interact with the different cultures that they were in. So there was a lot more going on. This movie, it's a showcase, and for the visuals and the sets and everything, it's nice, but you only really get certain aspects of certain cultures. Really, nothing really interesting happens until maybe like the last act of the movie. And the problem is that from the perspective of the film, the actual plot, the whole tension for everything is, oh no, if he doesn't make it there in time, he's going to lose some money. Not even be ruined, he's just going to lose his bet, and he's going to look like a fool. For me, that's not enough really to
not very high stakes
for the movie. I mean, this is me being generous. Because the movie looks very good for the time, I'm going to give it a B-, but I don't know. Story's barely there for me.
Well, yeah, the problem is there isn't much of a movie here.
No.
This is a travelogue with the most threadbare story.
Very low.
And I can't necessarily blame the film. Back in the mid-50s, cable TV didn't exist, let alone the Travel Channel, so we had to have movies like this to teach us all about the different cultures with some of their big staples thrown in. You know, we at some points we were even calling, like, oh, when they go here, we're going to see the kabuki, we're going to see this.
It's a little stereotypical.
It is directed well enough, that's for sure. Each new locale being showcased appropriately, if way too long. And it is acted very well with David Niven, Charles Boyer, and another great early Shirley MacLaine performance. But I have seen much better Verne adaptations. This is essentially a pretty, overlong puff piece, certainly not worthy of Oscar gold. I'm with you, Joe. It's a B- for me, and I feel that is generous just based on the time period, and that visually it is nice to look at.
I mean, I'm giving it the benefit of a doubt, but I just saw some of those other nominees, and I'm like, really? This one Best Picture?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah.
Like, not even close. I mean, even by the standards of the 50s, where's your core story?
Right.
There's barely anything there.
Well, and what's funny about the nominees you mentioned, look which ones have held up.
Exactly.
ABC, a broadcast network, still runs the Ten Commandments every single Easter.
Of course they do.
Ben-Hur still runs all the time on cable.
Great movie.
And
this
gets remade by Jackie Chan.
It still shows up here and there.
I know, but come on.
Well, no, it's not Ten Commandments. But...
Right. I wish there was more of a story here. I didn't mind going to all the different locations, but
nothing really happens.
It's tedious. Nothing happens.
I mean, literally, even when they go to Mexico, they spend more time in Mexico than they do some countries, and you get to see enough of to showcase the bullfighting, which is all you really get to see. And it seems like that's going to end, and then they go on for another 15 minutes.
I know.
So we just basically got this bull, we hired these fighters, we might as well get more out of this we can, because otherwise it's a waste. So it's it's really obvious they wanted to cut it there, and they just have a whole other extra scene. It's just stuff like that throughout the movie is painful, And
it is interesting to note, there are probably close to a dozen different versions of this movie.
That doesn't surprise me.
Because there were so many different cuts of it. Some of them have been, lost now for the ages, but there's still 3 or 4 different ones in print, and Turner Classic will run, this one or that one, and because it all depends, and some of them are a bit shorter, which I'm sure is great, but, this is, I guess, the main theatrical original release that we watched, and, it's ridiculously long. Justin, you said that as well, that you felt the length of it.
Oh, no question. Epic comedy, I've never seen it work. I mean, I know, didn't you say, I believe when we were watching it, it's a mad world you were a big fan of?
Oh yeah, I love that movie.
If you want, it's also incredibly long.
Okay, that's an example of a movie that's incredibly long, but the difference between that one and this one is that there are a lot of characters, and they all do stuff, and you get to spend time with each of them. Here we have 2 or 3 main characters that are just kind of floating, literally.
Yeah.
There's not really much going on.
All we really know about them is the one likes to make bets. The other one
is really loyal to
the other ridiculously loyal.
Loyal to the other guy. It's
he gets into trouble.
Yeah, that's the issue there. You're right. I think even longer than this one.
You can't make a 3-hour movie out of that.
But you've got Rat Race as well, also another great one.
But not as long. Rat Race is a pretty slim 2 hours, I think, somewhere along there.
But even for a comedy, 2 hours is pretty long.
Yeah, it depends. Don't tell that to Judd Apatow. He doesn't know that yet. But in most cases, you're correct.
You're right. They pretty long ones there.
Yeah. All right. Just a couple more weeks until our Oscar wrap-up, which actually, really we do it the week before the Oscars because it's our 2014 final wrap-up, and then we give our Oscar predictions for that show. So that's going to be in just about a week and a half's time. I suppose the Oscars coming at us pretty quickly. Joe, what's new on the Merlin page? I know you're getting up the Sopranos retrospective shows that you and I are doing.
Yep, we're getting those up. I'm actually working on another one right now. Probably get that up tonight, and probably before you get this particular podcast,
probably true.
A couple days beforehand. I did a little video talking about getting into Fullmetal Alchemist, which is one of my favorite anime series of all time.
Oh yeah,
because it was requested, and I'll probably be focusing on some other requests, and I'll be getting some sort of analysis video out tomorrow, hopefully.
Okay.
And I'm also doing something with my other collab group. My one buddy wanted to get introduced to a lot of famous graphic novels because he doesn't know a lot about comics. I'm going to recommend one, and he's going to talk about it, reflect on it with me, and
awesome.
I'm going to do that with him for a while.
Like me in The Sopranos.
That's, I think, where he got the idea.
Cool.
So we're going to do that, hopefully.
Awesome. All right, well, and we are getting new subscribers all the time on our channel here on YouTube, so if you are not one of them yet, go ahead and subscribe. We'd love to have you aboard. You can also join in and look at our 5-word reviews weekly on the Facebook group, Film Fanatics, with an exclamation point. And don't forget, we do have a listener's choice slot for February coming up in just a couple of weeks. So if you have an old classic that you'd like to hear us talk about on the show, let us know what that is. And you can also check out our Twitter feed as well, at Film Fanatics Pod. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye!